My dear children, today's topics are Gestalt psychology and behaviorism. You know already what is structuralism, what is introspection method, and the main concept of functionalism also. Now turn Gestalt psychology. And in the early 20th century, a new perspective called Gestalt psychology emerged. And just opposite, the structuralism. Yes, the opposite part of structuralism is Gestalt psychology. So, what is the main concept of Gestalt psychology and what is the meaning of Gestalt? Gestalt, first of all, is a German word. Yes, comes from Gestalten. The meaning, whole. Yes, the meaning of Gestalt is whole. And now, who are Gestalt psychologists? Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, Kohler are Gestalt psychologists. So now, what are the main concept of Gestalt psychologist? Yes. And the important thing is that it focused on the organization of perceptual experiences. And the structuralism. What is the main concept of structuralism? And structuralism said, our mind has divided into several elements, several segments. Yes. And Gestalt said, instead of looking at the components of minds, and we just perceive as a whole. Yes. Now, suppose for examples, next slide, and how children, you perceive these all pictures. Yes, is a circle, is a triangle, and when we perceive these all pictures and we perceive as a whole, it's not considered, the gap of each line. Yes, so we perceive as a whole. Yes, so now next, the main part of Gestalt, it focused on the organization of perceptual experiences, and instead of looking at the components of the mind, the Gestalt psychologist argued that when we look at the world, our perceptual experience is more than the sum of the components of the perception. That is important. Yes, and another important, what we experience is more than the inputs received from our environment. Yes, that is also important. And now, suppose for example, a light from a series of flashing bulbs falls on our retina, we actually experience movements of light. Yes, when we see a movie, we actually have a series of rapidly moving images of still pictures falling on our retina. Yes, but the perceptual experiences is more than the elements. We perceive as a whole. Our experience is holistic. Yes, our experience, all are interconnected. That is the main concept of Gestalt. We perceive as a whole. Yes. And now today, Gestalt ideas are part of the study of cognitive psychology. Yes. And from Gestalt school just emerged Gestalt therapy. Okay. So, next school, behavioristic school. And what is the main concept of behaviorism? And we know the three forces of psychology. Yes, the three forces are behavioristic school, psychodynamic perspective, and humanistic perspective. So one is behavioristic school. So what is the main part of behavioral perspective? And now, behavioral perspective focuses on the role of the external environment in governing our action. Yes. So, according to behaviorist, and our environment is important. Our experiences are important. Yes. And the other important part of behaviorism, John Watson rejected the ideas of mind and consciousness as subject matters of psychology. Yes. And this school emerged as a result against structuralism also. And J.B. Watson is the main person of this school. Yes. And J.B. Watson was greatly influenced by the work of physiologists like Ivan Pavlov on classical conditioning. The conditioning is also an important part of this school. And later, the learning chapter, you will know about what is conditioning, what are the different types of conditioning. And according to Watson, mind is not observable. Yes, mind is not observable. And introspection is subjective. You know what is introspection. And structuralists used this method, introspection, means the self-analysis. And introspection is subjective because it can't be verified by another observer. That's why introspection is not a scientific method. And according to him, scientific psychology must focus on what is observable and verifiable. That is also important. What is observable, what is verifiable. And he defined psychology as a study of behavior or response which can be measured and studied objectively. The again important thing is that, and psychology as a study of behavior, according to J.B. Watson, or responses which can be measured and studied objectively. Yes. And various behaviorists, Pavlov, Skinner, Tolman, Hall, and behaviorist. They are behaviorist. And the famous concept of Skinner, reinforcement, and Skinner gave the theory of operant conditioning. Pavlov's theory, classical conditioning, and other important thing is that, and other important theory of this school, observational learning and social learning theory. And this theory was given by Albert Bandura. Yes. And behaviorist, from this school emerged important therapy is a behavior therapy. And we can use this therapy for various kinds of psychological disorder. Yes. Like, anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. We can use this therapy. And other important part of behaviorist school, behavior is learned rather than unlearned. Yes, behavior is learned. Experiences are important. Environment is important. Yes, and behaviorists strongly rejected, the concept of subjectivism. Yes. And so, the Gestalt means, as a whole, and behaviorist psychologist, the main concept of behaviorism, experiences are important. Behavior as learned rather than unlearned. Scientific psychology must focus on what is observable and verifiable. And according to Watson, yes, psychology as a study of behavior which can be measured and studied objectively. Yes, and Gestalt psychologist Kohler, Kafka, Cartlewin, Wertheimer, and behaviorist J.B. Watson, Pavlov, Skinner, Bandura, Hall, Tolman, etc. Thank you, my children.